If I asked you to name the one thing you do every single day that could either sharpen your memory or quietly dull it, most people would guess sleep, stress, maybe exercise, but almost nobody guesses the most repeated signal of all, the one your brain never stops listening to because it has to. Food. Not the big dramatic meals you remember, but the daily patterns you barely notice, because your brain isn't judging your diet the way a mirror does. It's judging it the way a power grid does, asking one brutal question over and over. Do I have clean fuel, stable blood flow, and low inflammation, or am I running on backup generators again? And once you understand how that question is answered, brain fog stops sounding like a mystery and starts sounding like a predictable consequence of predictable inputs. Here's the twist most people never hear until it's too late. Your brain is only about 2% of your body weight, but it burns roughly a fifth of your energy, which means it's always hungry, but not for calories the way you think. It's hungry for usable energy. That's why someone can eat plenty, even gain weight, and still feel mentally slow, unfocused, and forgetful. Because the problem isn't the amount of food. The problem is that the brain's fuel system becomes less efficient with age. And modern eating habits accelerate that inefficiency until the brain is surrounded by fuel it can't access smoothly. That's when you start misplacing words, losing names, rereading the same paragraph, and blaming your age, when really your brain is running a quieter crisis. The first piece of the puzzle is the one that shocks people because it flips the story they've told themselves for years. We're taught that mental decline is wear and tear, like a machine grinding down, but in many cases it behaves more like an energy shortage. As you get older, and especially as insulin resistance creeps in, the brain becomes less efficient at using glucose, which is the fuel most people rely on all day. So you can have plenty of sugar circulating, but the neurons can't use it efficiently, which creates a strange paradox where the brain feels tired even when the body is well fed. It's like standing in front of a locked pantry with shelves full of food, and the lock is the problem, not the pantry. And that's where the story gets uncomfortable, because it means your normal daily eating might be training that lock to stick. Every time you spike blood sugar aggressively, insulin surges to manage it, and over time, your cells can become less responsive to insulin signal. People associate insulin resistance with weight. But the brain is part of that story too, because insulin isn't just a blood sugar hormone, it's also involved in memory formation and neuronal signaling. So when insulin signaling becomes impaired, the brain doesn't just struggle with energy, it can struggle with the very processes that help you learn, recall, and focus. This is why some researchers have even nicknamed Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, not as a diagnosis you should self-apply, but as a warning that metabolic dysfunction and cognitive decline often walk together. But if this were only about fuel, the solution would be simple. Eat different fuel and move on. The real trap is that energy problems and inflammation problems feed each other, and inflammation is the accelerant that makes everything feel like it's sliding downhill faster than it should. Inflammation in the brain rarely feels like swelling or pain. It feels like slower thinking. It feels like irritability. It feels like the mental spark is harder to find. And because it's subtle, people assume it's just life. But inside the brain, chronic low-grade inflammation can disrupt synapses, impair neurotransmitters, and slowly corrode the wiring that makes memory feel effortless. The frightening part is that the foods that drive this are often the ones we snack on casually, the refined carbs, added sugars, and ultra-processed fats that keep the immune system humming in the background. So now you can see the trap forming. A brain that's struggling to use glucose efficiently often craves quick glucose, and the diet that provides quick glucose often increases inflammation, and inflammation further impairs insulin signaling, which further worsens the fuel problem, which makes cravings louder, which makes habits harder to break. That's not a failure of discipline. That's a system trapped in a loop. And the reason eat better advice fails is because it doesn't explain the loop. So people change a few foods and keep the same signals, and then they wonder why nothing changed upstairs. Now, here's the part that feels almost unfair in your favor, because once you understand this, the path forward gets clearer than you expect. Your brain doesn't need perfect eating. It needs stable signals. It needs fewer spikes, fewer crashes, and more consistent delivery of nutrients that support neuronal membranes and reduce oxidative stress. That's why the phrase daily matters more than dramatic, because when it comes to the brain, consistency compounds. Small daily actions don't feel heroic, but they reshape the internal environment that determines whether your brain operates like a high-performance engine or a sputtering machine. This is why healthy fats matter in a way most people misunderstand. The brain isn't just influenced by fat, it's built from it. Neuronal membranes rely on specific fats to remain flexible and responsive, because those membranes are where signaling happens. When those membranes become less resilient, communication between brain cells becomes less precise, and that shows up as slower recall and weaker focus. This is where omega-3 fats, especially DHA, become a daily lever, because DHA isn't a trendy supplement ingredient. It's structural material. It's like upgrading the insulation on wiring in your brain. And once you understand that, you stop treating fats as calories and start treating them as building blocks. But fats don't work in a vacuum. And this is where people get tricked by healthy meals that still sabotage them. You can eat a clean-looking breakfast that's mostly refined carbs, and because it digests fast, it spikes glucose fast, insulin rises fast, and then glucose drops fast, and the brain interprets that drop like danger, so cravings roar back. Then you snack, then you repeat. So the issue isn't just what you eat, it's the roller coaster you create. Healthy fats and protein can slow digestion, flatten the spike, and create a calmer glucose curve, which makes mental energy steadier and makes cravings quieter. And the quieting of cravings is not a small thing. It's the moment the loop begins to break. Now, before we go deeper, there's a second factor that can make a perfect brain diet fail, even if your fuel is clean, and it's the one nobody thinks about until it's compromised. Blood flow. Your brain is a greedy organ, and it doesn't just need fuel, it needs delivery. Oxygen, glucose, ketones, micronutrients, all of it arrives through your blood vessels, and waste products leave the same way. If circulation is compromised, your brain becomes like a city with clogged roads. Supplies arrive late. Garbage removal slows. Everything backs up. And cognitively, that feels like mental fatigue, slower processing, and more mistakes. This is why vascular health and brain health are inseparable, because the brain can only perform as well as its blood supply allows. And here's where daily food becomes a lever again, because the lining of your blood vessels, the endothelium, responds to what you eat like it's receiving instructions. Certain foods support nitric oxide, a molecule that helps blood vessels relax and widen, improving circulation. When nitric oxide is supported, blood pressure tends to stabilize, oxygen delivery improves, and the brain becomes better supplied. This is why people sometimes feel clear after certain meals and sluggish after others, because the difference isn't moral, it's physiological. Some meals create vascular calm, others create vascular stress. So now the story has three threads weaving together: fuel, inflammation, and blood flow. And the reason most people feel stuck is because they try to pull only one thread. They take a supplement for memory, but keep eating patterns that spike insulin. They do crosswords, but keep inflammation high. They drink coffee to fight fatigue, but ignore the circulation problem underneath. But when you start aligning all three threads, the change doesn't feel like forcing the brain. It feels like removing resistance from the system. Now let's talk about the part that makes this truly powerful, because it explains why daily food can supercharge the brain, even when someone thinks they're too old to change. Neuroplasticity. Your brain can form new connections throughout life, but it needs signals that support that growth. One of the most important is BDNF, a growth factor that helps neurons survive, adapt, and strengthen connections. BDNF tends to decline with age, but diet and lifestyle can influence it dramatically. So the question becomes, are you eating in a way that quietly raises the brain's growth signals or lowers them? This is where polyphenols enter the story, not as vague antioxidants, but as molecular signals that influence inflammation, blood flow, and neuronal resilience. These compounds, found in colorful plants and certain traditional foods, can reduce oxidative stress and support signaling pathways linked to learning and memory. When people hear this, they imagine expensive powders. But the irony is that many of the most studied compounds come from ordinary foods eaten consistently. And that's the key again, consistency. Not because one serving is magic, but because daily exposure keeps the environment favorable. But there's a catch that most people miss. And this is where we start moving toward the deceptively simple intervention you teased at the beginning. If you give the brain all the right nutrients, but you keep the metabolic noise high, meaning constant snacking, constant insulin spikes, constant late night eating, you blunt many of the benefits because the brain never gets a stable hormonal environment. Stability is not boring here. Stability is the platform that allows everything else to work. This is why some people can take omega-3 seconds and eat berries and still feel foggy, because they're stacking good inputs on top of chaotic signals. So the real question is not what single food should I eat, even though we're going to get very specific. The real question is what daily pattern creates the cleanest, calmest brain environment so the foods you eat actually become usable tools. Because once you fix the pattern, the right daily foods start working like they're supposed to. And the first sign is not a miracle memory improvement overnight. The first sign is that mental energy becomes steadier. The second sign is that focus lasts longer. The third sign is that the food noise quiets down. And when the noise quiets down, consistency becomes automatic. Now imagine what happens when a person begins to eat in a way that reduces spikes, supports healthy fats, lowers inflammation, and improves blood flow. And they do it daily. The brain doesn't just get more fuel. It gets more stable fuel. It doesn't just get less inflammation. It gets less immune interference. It doesn't just get better circulation. It gets better oxygen delivery and waste removal. And when those become your default, the brain starts operating closer to its potential again, not because you discovered a miracle, but because you removed the bottlenecks that were quietly starving it. But we still haven't answered the most important practical question, the one your brain is already asking right now because it wants something concrete. What exactly do you eat daily? And how do you do it without turning your life into a complicated rule book that you abandon in a week? Because this is where most advice fails. It either becomes a rigid plan that creates stress, or it becomes vague inspiration that changes nothing. So in the next part, we're going to narrow this down to a simple daily brain stack that works because it hits all the major pathways at once: energy, inflammation, blood flow, and plasticity, without requiring perfection. And there's one specific daily addition, so small it sounds almost stupid, that changes the entire system because it works like a switch for both blood flow and inflammation. And once you hear it, you'll realize you've either been ignoring it or using it the wrong way your entire life. Because when you place it correctly, you don't just eat healthier, you change how your brain runs, which is exactly where we're going. That almost stupid daily addition isn't exotic, it isn't expensive, and it isn't hidden in a supplement aisle. Because the brain doesn't need mystery to change. It needs a repeated signal it can trust. It's extra virgin olive oil used daily and used on purpose, not as a sprinkle to feel virtuous, but as a core ingredient that shows up every single day like a non-negotiable. And the reason it matters is not just that it's a healthy fat, but because it carries plant compounds that behave like instructions inside your body, calming inflammation at the level of your blood vessels in your brain. So the fuel you eat can actually reach neurons without fighting a war on the way there. Here's why this is the perfect daily move. Most people try to improve brain health by adding one flashy thing once in a while, a smoothie, a supplement, a brain drink, but the brain doesn't remodel itself on occasional events. It remodels itself on the baseline environment you create. Olive oil is powerful because it quietly upgrades that environment. And when the environment improves, everything else you do starts working better. Your blood vessels become more responsive, so circulation improves. Inflammation signals soften. So synapses stop getting irritated, insulin signaling becomes calmer, so energy becomes steadier. And suddenly the same brain that felt sluggish starts feeling like it has more bandwidth, not because you forced it, but because you removed friction. But olive oil alone isn't the whole story, because the brain doesn't run on one nutrient any more than a city runs on one type of fuel. So the second daily piece is color, specifically deeply colored plants, because the brain is vulnerable to oxidative stress. And oxidative stress doesn't announce itself with pain, it announces itself with fog. This is why berries deserve their reputation, but not in a magical way, in a mechanical way. Berries are concentrated signals that help reduce oxidative stress and support communication between neurons, especially in areas involved in learning and memory. The trick is not to treat berries like a dessert replacement once a week. The trick is to treat them like brain maintenance, a small serving most days, because the brain responds to repeated protection far more than heroic bursts. Now notice what's happening. We're building a daily stack that hits multiple pathways without becoming complicated. Olive oil gives you a stable fat base plus anti-inflammatory signaling. Berries give you polyphenols that support neural resilience. But you still need the third piece, the one that stops the entire system from being hijacked by blood sugar swings, because the brain hates volatility. That third piece is protein, not because protein is trendy, but because protein stabilizes the day. A brain that starts the day with sugar and refined carbs often spends the rest of the day chasing stability. And that chase feels like cravings, dips, irritability, and mental fatigue. But a brain that starts with a protein anchor paired with healthy fats and fiber tends to experience fewer spikes and fewer crashes, which means more consistent focus, less food noise, and better cognitive endurance. And this is where people mess up, because they assume the brain likes carbs, so they feed it carbs constantly. But what the brain actually likes is steady fuel. And steady fuel comes from stable metabolism, not constant snacking. If you eat in a way that keeps insulin elevated all day, you don't give the brain the option to access alternative fuels like ketones, which can be an efficient backup for aging neurons. You don't need extreme fasting to benefit from this. You just need space. Space between meals, space overnight, space that lets insulin come down and let your brain experience metabolic calm long enough for energy to feel clean instead of jittery. So here's the daily framework that makes a supercharged claim real without hype. You build meals around a protein anchor, then you add a colorful plant layer, then you add a healthy fat layer, and you stop treating snacks like harmless entertainment. Because every snack is a signal, and the signal is either stay in sugar mode or let the system settle. When the system settles, the brain can stabilize, and when the brain stabilizes, you stop needing constant stimulation to feel awake. Now, because your brain is also a blood flow organ, we add one more simple daily lever that feels too easy to matter, but it matters because blood vessels respond to it almost immediately. A short walk after meals, not a workout, not a punishment, a 10-minute stroll that tells your muscles to absorb glucose with less insulin. That means glucose clears faster, insulin stays lower, and blood vessels get a gentle stimulus that improves endothelial function. And here's the brain part most people don't realize. Better post-meal glucose handling often means fewer afternoon mental crashes, right? So you're not just getting steps, you're preventing the metabolic dip that makes focus feel impossible later. Now let's tie this together into a repeatable daily brain plate that you can actually live with. Imagine one meal in your day, any meal, where you make a simple rule. Protein first, color second, olive oil third. Eggs with cooked vegetables and olive oil. Greek yogurt with berries and crushed nuts and a drizzle of olive oil if you can handle the taste, or olive oil at the next meal. Fish with greens dressed in olive oil and lemon. Beans and lentils with vegetables plus olive oil. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be consistent, because once you have one daily brain plate, it becomes the anchor that upgrades your baseline. And upgrading your baseline is how you change cognition over time. But let's address the fear that always appears here, because if we don't, your brain will sabotage you with a story that sounds logical. I'm too old to change. That's the lie that keeps people stuck. The brain remains plastic, but it becomes more sensitive to signals. That means small positive signals can still compound and small negative signals can still erode. So the question isn't whether you can reverse every change. The question is whether you can improve the environment your brain lives in. And you can, because the environment is built from daily choices, not genetic destiny. Now, to make this even more practical, here's the simplest daily brain stack you can start tomorrow without redoing your entire life. Pick 1, olive oil daily as your default fat. Pick 2, a colorful plant daily that you actually enjoy. Berries, leafy greens, tomatoes, herbs, spices. Pick 3, a protein anchor at your first main meal so your day doesn't begin with a spike and crash. Then protect one thing that matters more than people expect, an overnight gap where you stop eating at least a few hours before sleep. Because sleep is when the brain clears waste and consolidates memory, and late night eating can fragment sleep and keep insulin elevated, which is the exact opposite of the environment your brain needs to repair. And this is where the title becomes real. Eat this daily to supercharge your brain at any age. Doesn't mean one miracle food. It means a daily pattern that repeatedly tells your brain, here's stable fuel, here's low inflammation, here's better blood flow, here's the raw material to rebuild. When those signals show up every day, neuroplasticity becomes more likely because the brain isn't constantly firefighting. It's finally allowed to invest energy into maintaining connections instead of just surviving. So let's close this the way it deserves with a simple challenge that proves to you that your brain responds faster than you think, because you don't need to wait months to notice the first signs. For the next 14 days, choose one daily non-negotiable. Either take 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil daily with food, or eat 1 serving of berries most days, or start your day with a protein anchor instead of refined carbs. Don't change everything at once. Change one signal and watch what happens to your mental energy in the afternoon, your cravings, your focus, your sleep quality, and your mood. Because the first proof is not a perfect memory test. The first proof is that the brain feels calmer and more stable. And stability is the foundation of sharpness. And if you want to stack the results without stacking complexity, add the 10-minute post-meal walk on most days, not to burn calories, but to protect your brain from glucose turbulence. Then keep your meals simple. Protein, plants, olive oil. Repeat. Let the compounding do the work. Because the brain is not waiting for you to be perfect. It's waiting for you to be consistent. If this changed the way you think about brain health, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who's been blaming aging for symptoms that are often signals. Your brain is listening to what you do daily. Send it signals that support clarity, and it will respond at any age.